Hi, welcome to Flow Goodness Podcast. Come and get some goodness. We're really happy that Stephen is here this time. We're going to talk about grief, loss, and dealing with loss. And we have a couple of stories to share with you. So we will jump in directly into the story of Stephen's experience with grief itself.
So I'm going to talk about the loss of my grandfather, which happened in 2020 during the lockdown phase when the COVID cases were just starting to rise, and the COVID had just started. So he got COVID, we don't know how exactly, but then he was admitted into the hospital, and I think 2-3 days, the doctor said that he was doing fine. And the next day we get to hear that he passed away. So that was very shocking to us because his health was apart from this, his health was doing very good, right? And it was a lockdown phase, and because the cases were going high, right, a lot of precautions were being taken at that time. So even people who died during those times, their bodies were wrapped in plastic sheets, right, so that it would not spread. Right. So what was all the more shocking was we did not get to see him at the last time, or to even have a word with him, right? It happened all of a sudden, right? So it's generally a last wish that everyone would want to see their loved one, right? So that was one thing that was very sad for us, and it was also very much complicated because it was the first time that I was dealing with the loss of a loved one, someone close to me, right?
How close were you to him? Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with him?
Yeah. So talking about that, I think I had a lot of fun time with him, even during my childhood and growing up. So he was a quite open and a fun-loving guy, right? So I remember the good memories, when I was a child, right? He used to take me to different places, to Kakaria and to see trains and stuff. And even as we grew up, so he was quite interested in football. So even I was interested in that. So we used to watch football matches together. That's and amazing. Also go out together. So quite a close relationship. Right? But so it also came as a shock to me. And at that time I wasn't very sure how to react. For me, it wasn't something tears just came flowing down me. Right. So I think it was 1 or 2 days after that it hit me. And so I guess it was some night time or something. So I just texted my friend and just wanted to talk about it and share things, right? So I feel I'm generally a person who does not, get hit by emotions so easily, right? So for me, it took some time to, just face the reality. And also what happened subsequently is every time that we in the house when we go about and we just feel that he would say something and stuff, because those memories are always there, the chair that he sat on and stuff, right? So and even now, it's been 3 years, but what happens is during some occasions or something like that, we still miss him in the sense that if he was here during this occasion, then he would have been doing those things, he would have been doing that things. So those memories still are there, right? So I think it is very rightly said, you do not move on with grief, right? That's not the aim of it, right? But you do definitely go forward, taking the grief, in a way, taking all those memories of your loved one, and you just move ahead, right? So that's how I face this whole thing.
Grief actually lessens by sharing it, right? Of course, some stories can be triggering, but it actually the way to unburden yourself is by sharing grief, right? So I completely empathize with your situation, with the closeness and losing him and etc. But one point which I observed is I don't think you've fully processed it, or you've dealt with it, right? In a way of grieving, right?
Yeah.
Though there is no absolute structure, it's very individual, as they say, grief belongs to the griever. So it's never fully comprehensible for anyone who's listening, right? To say that, yeah, I completely understand what you would have felt and gone through. Yeah, I can relate to.
Yeah, true.
Because I have dealt with loss as well. I have dealt with grief as well. I have lost people in my life as well. So, one story to share, is that this happened in 2006, way back, right? So some parts of the memory is a little sketchy. And so this has to do about me losing my friend, one of my best friends. Okay. So our favorite thing was heading off to the beach and, so stuff like that. So I want to tell you a little bit about my best friend's background. Okay. So he belonged to a goldsmith family. So essentially, they get these clients, so who bring in jewels and etc. to get them melted into gold bars, and and it was he belonged to a very tight knit community. Okay, so he was from a particular place in Maharashtra. So and all these families knew each other, and they lived in a tenement kind of a style. So to give you a visual, it's like these tiny little houses stacked together, one after the other, with the middle portion being open. So you can actually, when you walk across in the corridor, you can actually peep through everyone's living room. So you get it. So the washrooms were common, etc. So it was not essentially like sort of in a well-off situation, sort of an average kind of a situation, but physically a very strong guy. He could literally pick up a bike and put it here, like muscly, and so that kind of a person, and very laugh loud and gregarious and noisy and boisterous, and that kind of that's him. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So so they were two brothers. Okay, and their father was very traditional. So I've been to their house. They've invited me several times, and initially I found it, to be frank, and I found it I found myself out of place, uncomfortable. Naturally the language was different. The tradition was different. The mom always had a veil, and like they were a little bit reserved, not like being very warm, with somebody coming in.
Right.
So there was this demarcation, men and women, and certain stuff. So in spite of that, they fed me, and when I was traveling, they would make this roti with pickle and wrap it up for me. And I found it difficult to eat, but still, I appreciate the gestures. So me and him, our favorite thing was hanging out on the beach. Both of us loved the beach. Okay, so he did have a bit of an alcohol habit. Okay, which thank God I didn't latch on to. Okay, so now I didn't realize how much inspired he was by me until one day, me and his dad had a conversation. Okay, I will come to that, but first I'll come to main part of the story. So the year is 2006, and I get a call. I've moved 2005. I left India to work in the Middle East, and so I made friends there. I had my own circle, my own activity, social life, etc. And so it was a Friday, so it was a day off, and I was out in the mall doing some shopping. So I get a call from him, saying that, hey, how are you? I'm good. Why are you sounding like this? He's saying, things are not good, man. So I'm calling you from the hospital. So I was with someone at that time, okay? And both of us were shopping. And then, so I was like, sure thing, I'll call you back as soon as I get back home.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So he's saying, don't forget. Right? I said, sure. Right? And what happened was I forgot to call him. Okay. So then the next month was my break, was my holiday. I was visiting India. I came back home. And my usual thing after coming back home is that the first day I rest, and then the next day I give a call to check on him, saying that, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
Let's hang out. Let's do this. Let's do that. And so as usual, I dialed his number and I called him, and his brother picked up. So, and I say, hey, give the phone to him. And he's saying, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? And like, what? He said, you don't know he's dead. So I was like, dude, don't joke like that. I don't like your joke, right? Give the phone to him. He's saying, I'm serious. In fact, he tried to reach you. He couldn't reach you. And he died in the hospital.
Oh no.
It was like a shock for me. Okay. So a massive shock. So here I am holding the phone and he was saying hello. And then I knew that he was serious and then that he's gone. Then I asked him what happened. So then he said he had developed, liver issues related with his, alcoholism, So then I got to know that he likes to drink it without mixing. He likes to drink it hard, right? Hard liquor, neat, in a sense, on the rocks kind of stuff.
Right.
Okay. So, and then that had actually become a pattern and he had probably done it over a few years. So, and then the liver condition had been advancing, he had not noticed it. And then when it went to stage 3 or stage 4, when it was in the final stage, that's when it started triggering, issues in him. And then he went to the hospital to attend. And by the time, it was already too late and then he passed away. So I just couldn't process it. I was like, how can this happen? And first thing that hit me was guilt.
True.
I was like, I didn't call him back. And I was having a great time, where I was working. So I was feeling like, oh my God, I was shopping and buying stuff for myself and hanging out with this friend. And it was a gala time. And then it just slipped my mind that I had to call him back. To get back to the background story, right? I didn't know how inspired this guy was by me because without telling me, he actually wanted to get out of being a goldsmith. He never wanted to follow his dad and follow the family business sort of. So he followed me around, asked me about, doing post-graduation. He did post-graduation based on my recommendation. He did an MBA as well. Then he got a job in the corporate sector. He hated it because he had to move out from his home.
Yeah.
So he used to connect with me on a daily basis, discussing difficulties of living in a different place. Then he's after a couple of years of working, he got fed up of that entire cultural thing. I was working in India at that time, and then he came to me asking for business ideas.
Right.
So I did give him a business idea at that time. Okay. So, which was at that time in 2005 and all that, computer training, education programs, software courses, etc. There were some programs which were on, so he started that as well. And he got married as well. So I've been through with him throughout the journey, So he discussed the entire marriage, the girl, whether she's, appropriate for him, the difficulties, adjusting to that new life. And then when he opened the second branch, a group of guys cheated him. They joined together and they sort of, took away contracts, took away, the misappropriated funds. So he went through some depression, etc. So, we were together during that time. We were talking during that time as well. And then we lost touch for about 6 to 7 months. So I presumed he got busy with his married life. To be frank, I got busy with my life as well, So my reactions were first is tremendous guilt. Right?
Yeah.
Second, as I told you a little bit, his dad didn't like me, right? Because his dad was like, we had one discussion once we were having lunch and then his dad was sitting there and then he started talking to me. He said, I want to talk to you. He said, yeah, tell me. He said, I don't like the way you're influencing my son.
Yeah, right.
I said, I'm not influencing. He's asking me for help. And what am I influencing? Like, I don't smoke or drink or, get into any other stuff. So he said, no, it's about work. I said, he wants to do what you're doing. I said, what's wrong with that? So it's his life, if he wants to. No, but I want him to follow our tradition. I want him to be a goldsmith. And who will take care of my family? Who will take care, what will his brother do? What will the family do? and he's got to get married, he's got to settle down and things like that. I said, I'll talk to him. And that conversation was the last time I went to their house. Then I stopped going, right? So because I felt out of place and I was young as well, I shared the news with my parents, so because of course they knew him. He had come home, for lunch several times and etc. So they knew I was, he was one of my good friends. So they were like immediately, okay, let's go. We have to condole, we have to sit with, we have to meet the family. We missed the funeral, we missed the entire thing, and we didn't know about this. So, and I said, no, I just don't have the guts to face his dad.
Yeah.
So, and I don't have, the strength to face his mom, because I knew that he was very close to his mom.
Yeah, right.
There was so many ifs, and then of course my own sense of guilt.
Yeah.
A tremendous guilt, and so I couldn't sleep that night. I sat up, and I was reading one of my novels, and just to keep myself occupied. So I just kept reading. I was lying down, no sleep. I couldn't cry. I could just feel like, oh my God, I should have called him.
It was very difficult to process everything.
Yeah. And then, so then I started visualizing like, okay, what if I just, encourage myself to go and meet the dad and talk to him, and like, what will I say? Because he's very formal. He's not the, hugging and handshaking type. He's a very traditional man, so it was horrible. So that entire, 1 or 2 weeks of break was a mess. And so I missed the things we did. In fact, once both of us tried to make biryani together. It was a disaster, but we ate it anyway. So, so then I was recalling, my mom was helping me sort of recall, a couple of instances where he had come home and all that. And once he liked what he has a voracious appetite. Once he liked what she had cooked, and which was again happened to be biryani, and then he ate up almost all of it. Anyway.
So regarding this thing, I'm really sorry for that loss. And also there's this guilt feeling and stuff that happened in your case as well, right? But I think a very good framework to understand this is that all the attachments that we form can be divided into 3 things, like space, time, and emotional closeness, right? And what we can see is that you are emotionally very close to him, right? You spend a lot of time with him, right? And now when you are coming back to the place, and you instinctively knew that when you came back, you had to call him and just meet up with him, right? So like that was a space and time for you, right? That always reminded you of him. So like always during the grieving process, like these 3 things are very important. So the emotional closeness that you have with the other person, if it's very high, you're very close to that person, right? Losing that person would just cause you that much grief. And like when you are around that space and time, right? So when you are around the things or the place that if you would have gone to that beach, right, it would just have brought all those memories back. Like the same thing happened with me, right? So even after the loss of my grandfather, right, there was this particular chair that he would always sit on, right? So that always would remind us of him. Right? And I think that does happen with everyone, right? So the more emotionally close you are to the person, the more you are going to feel that grief.
I think this is, I think this gives us, sorry, I interrupted. I think this gives an opportunity to define grief itself, So grief is physical, grief is emotional, grief is not exactly time bound, so it can be delayed grief, it can be like in mine sort of a thing, sort of suppressed grief, like trying hard to avoid like that whole thing, that you don't want to, like, it's almost like, oh my God, as if my phone call would have saved him, but that's in hindsight, and like, all right now reflecting, I know that's not true.
Right.
It would have brought a sense of consolation.
True.
So.
And I think during this grief process, and especially in the whenever there's a loss of loved one, there's always these what if questions, right?
Yeah.
What if I had just done this, and what if I just met that person once, and these are some questions, right? Like, even if we get answers to them, it might not really console us or something. But it's a pattern, right? We tend to keep thinking on those things, right? What if this was the case? What if this was the case?
To tell you the truth, I actually haven't cried for him till now. Like, I've regretted it. I have felt bad for it. I did try and process it once in one of the coaching sessions. But I've never been able to completely comprehend it. So guilt sort of stays. And the little that I've learned is that it stays, in your back. It actually affects your support system, which is your spine. It rests behind and forms as back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain. That is a physical component of it, right? So also you feel it. It is so physical. You feel it in the pit of your stomach. It affects your hunger. It affects your sleep. It makes you feel a little, listless, restless.
Yeah.
Feel anxious and depressed, and of course it is heavily emotional because anything can trigger, right? As you mentioned, the beach can trigger. That particular beach can trigger. The cafes which we guys used to hang out. And suddenly when you see any of these guys, who are from that part of the world, who are this macho, boisterous, noisy, huge laugh and all of that, you do think, hey, this guy looks so much like my friend. So in a sort of a way, I'm trying to recreate someone in the likeness of my friend.
True.
In the likeness of what we shared. So probably I should, at some point reflect on it and process it.
Yeah.
So coming back to grief itself, so it's physical, it's emotional, it is not time bound. It can come back to you anytime. It can catch you at the wrong time when you're actually going through a low phase.
And also that I think that quote is very important. Like, at least one thing that we can get off this podcast is like, the grief belongs to the griever, right?
Yeah.
Because even if we both had the same loss, right, you might react differently to it, and I might react very differently to it, right? And sometimes I've heard people who have lost their loved one, right? They themselves start having panic attacks, anxiety attacks for the very reason, right? And so people process it very differently. But I think it's very important that, you try to process it in healthy ways. Because when we see, instead of just trying to run away from all those emotions and things, right? You can either talk to someone. So one of the things that really helps during the grieving process is the rituals. And what I mean by it is engaging in the things that you used to do with them, right? So if it was my grandfather, right, just having tea with him, like when he was sitting on the chair. So maybe just engaging in that thing, right? So it helps you to process those things, right? So the three things that I shared, right? Space, time, and emotional closeness. So now what happens is, right, the person might not be there, but you still have to recreate that whole map along the 3 dimensions, right? And that might take some time, right? It's not to say that you have to let go of that emotional closeness, but we might have to still recreate that map, right? So it kind of helps. And even writing letters to them might help, right? It's a good cathartic process, right? Putting out what you have on your mind just onto the paper and letting it puts off that burden of you, right?
Agreed. Okay. So you mentioned rituals, right? So ritualism, which we were talking about, I wanted to discuss a little bit about it. So the element or the role that music plays in rituals, right? And now, as you know, that music is healing in itself. It regulates, calms you down. It regulates your blood pressure in terms of your heart rate. So it has a direct influence on your blood pressure. In case, if you're hyping yourself up and putting yourself through those intense emotions, and you're in that heightened state of sadness, so music helps, and it's already part of a very old tradition, in terms of lamenting, crying and moaning and chest beating and doing that as part of the grieving process, so which was traditionally there. And as we move towards, the city modern life, and, expression of intense emotions are a little subdued. And even if it is, most of the settings are formal, and it is sort of preoccupied with, getting together and, feasting, or, praying a little, and, so there are many cultural connotations to it, so there are, each culture approaches it differently, as I mentioned earlier during a conversation, there is sky burial, water burial, regular land burial, cremation, compression into, the cremated remains into, gems or stones, etc., using that for display. Then sometimes continuation, revisiting the dead, and, rather enabling the decomposition process. So sometimes living with the dead, and so cultural components, ritualistic components are two, right? One is they celebrate that life. If it is also, as you mentioned, the time and space context, if it is a person who has lived well and lived longer, and they die a natural death, so then and they don't want to be remembered, and the remaining family doesn't want to remember that as a sad occasion, and it calls for a moment of celebration. So then the approaches are different.
Yeah.
Now, but if you're young, and in fact, if you end up losing somebody, pivotal to your life, and that's going to have devastating effects on you, right? And if you don't grieve, and you don't know how to grieve, and you have not dealt with it, so probably talking to someone who is capable of handling this, maybe talking to a therapist, or talking to, going through a session, that would be pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Because it's critical, so what I personally believe is that it sort of holds you back in that place, you sort of are kind of, that period is sort of lost in you, and it remains in you. So this, as it is mentioned, all our experiences become a part of us. It never goes away, never really goes away, so everybody who has ever lost anything was grieved, or who has not grieved and delayed the grief, so they know about it. So coming back to the musical component, so maybe listening to music itself would help, and I also find it very interesting that you talk about writing, right? So when you write down all your thoughts, like, I'm sorry I should have called you, I'm called you back, sorry, I should have picked up your phone and then talked to you right then and there, though I was in the mall, etc. Probably, I'm sorry I should have. So guilt sort of looks for punishment, and as we've spoken about that several times, right? So this continued grieving is also sort of a self-punishing mechanism, that saying that, yeah, I am in a sort of a way responsible for that.
Yeah.
That thing happened, that somebody. So just like, birth and death and those important milestones, there is not much of definition and control over them. One of the things my friend taught me, so about the writing and all of that, so the next step to it, okay, is also, except for the key memorabilia, right? Like photographs or this or that, it's better not to hold on to the smaller things. Okay, at least when it comes to loss of relationships and you want to move on. Okay, so see, a friend, a dad or mom, a grandpa, a family member, a pet, like these are pretty intense, right? You get it? A relationship is also pretty intense, but however, when you're young, or you're looking to move on into another relationship, if you're going to have a lot of these little tiny things collected up, you're not going to let go of it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's going to keep triggering. So it reminds me of a story. So one of my good friends, she lost her dad suddenly to a heart attack. Okay. So when I was sitting and talking to her, I was asking her, how did you manage? So one of the things that she did is, so she first went into depression because he was the breadwinner. She had just graduated and she had no clue, and she had to handle the business, and then the whole world came crashing down. It was like a single, the only daughter,
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
And it was suddenly just the mom and the daughter, and they don't know finances, life, dad. There was a lot of dependency, right? So when I was asking her, how did you cope with it? So she was telling me that first she, of course, in a state of shock, crying. So one of the ways that she was coping, after the initial shock and situation was there, was she joined a group which was preparing for a marathon. So she started going out for practice with them. And this was an entirely new set of people, none of the people that she knew. So then she started hanging out with them. And of course, it was physical as well.
Right.
So I think that when you get into activities of exercise, actually somehow pushing yourself to get out of that stagnant state, So this is one learning from her, okay? Because she was very close to her dad, and she was like, she didn't open his, wardrobe because she didn't want to lose the smell. So sometimes she used to miss him a lot. She used to just open it, get a feel of him, his cologne, his clothes, his stuff, and then just immediately close it back. And I'm sorry. So I think it's a very intense, not very, how do I say, there's step 1, step 2, step 3.
True.
It's a very intense, very personal process, So the thing is, you would miss their smell, you would miss their smile, you would miss their, their clothes, their favorite thing. Now, how are you going to replace hugs and kisses and cuddles? And you understand what I mean? So it's so difficult because each one is different. And so this was one. And then when I was telling you about that friend of mine, who helped me cope with, one phase of life. So what he said is, it's better to burn all of them, all those little memorabilias, and actually see in front of your eyes that you've turned it into ashes, okay, and move it away.
I think it's also very important, like what you mentioned about those friends of yours, right? That grief is a sign of love, right? It shows that you love that person, you love that thing or whatever you are grieving about, right? It's a sign of love. And also, grief is like a healing process, right? So, for example, I had a physical injury, right? Then to heal through it, I'll still have to go through some kind of pain, right? But after that, there does come healing. And so it's quite similar with grief, that to process it and to go through that phase, it's very difficult. It's very painful, right? And it might be very different for different people, but that is a way to, to go to progress in the healing process. I think it's like a few of the things that you mentioned, and even apart from that, like talking to your friends or talking to your loved ones is also very important. Like, because I know that, like, what happened with my grandfather. So after that, like, even our family, me, my mom, dad, right, and like a little bit of our extended family, like when we would gather together, sometimes we would just remember all those things about him, right? But it would now be in a happy way that he lived a good life, so it was so much more enjoyable. So with him, so there's still a sense of losing that thing, right? Losing all those memories and stuff, and him not being with us. But there's also another sense of accepting that and remembering those things, but in a positive way, right? In a way that, yes, he did live a good life.
Agreed. I think that makes me reflect on one important component, that if that loss or that grief or that death or has actually created guilt in you, probably one way would be first to start with the forgiveness process. So when I was doing a forgiveness exercise once, so it actually, though, I was lining up all these people who I have to forgive, who have all done wrong, in various aspects. I think one of the key areas was about forgiving myself. Like, so that when you have to forgive yourself and let go of holding on. So one interesting thing which I read is sometimes, and then this is very contextual as well. So India has more civil cases than criminal cases. Okay, and the civil disputes are mostly about properties. Okay, so it's about fight between the brothers who getting the property, etc., or the brothers or sisters, or the family members, etc. So one interesting interpretation what I read is that everybody wants to feel intense emotions and some form of bonding, okay, and when they can't have it in the normal way, they at least want to have it into a legal entanglement.
Okay,
you get it? So in a similar fashion, now I'm processing in a part of it, holding myself or holding guilt towards not calling him back and not being a great friend, not going through the grieving process, not condoling with his family, not meeting his parents, and basically like drawing myself out of that situation and holding on to that is also the complicated way of dealing with it. Right? That you want to feel it intensely, and then somehow you just create this convoluted mind space which you keep within yourself. And I think many people go through that. And also it is important to reflect on that if that is disrupting you from creating new relationships, if it is disrupting you from leading a normal life, if it is disrupting your normal patterns, assuming you're holding on to it and I couldn't sleep for several nights because night you're alone and you have plenty of time to think, and you're just processing this whole lot of stuff, and it is just there, and then it's like sitting like a big elephant in the room saying that, oh my god, you didn't call back, so and you were in there and in the last minute, and then and it is pretty poetic in a way, in the sense that he called from his deathbed to connect and talk and explain to you that, hey, this is happening to me, I might die. That's what he would have wanted to tell me, in a sense that that this has happened and this is what has happened to my health and etc. So if I can get to see you, that would have given him closure as well. So I feel guilty about that, and it would have given me closure as well. Okay, so I think forgiveness and that entire journey towards closure is so critical. It is so critical because when we don't create closures and we hold on, and that sort of morphs into your personality, right? And then guilt becomes a very huge component of you, and it will disrupt you, in the sense that it is very closely related to shame as well. So sometimes it's very like certain deaths are very shameful to if it is in a complicated situation, so assuming you're driving and it results in causing death, so I think that's pretty intense. Though it's called an accident, but still, the guilt and all of those. So it is very situational as well, so, so from takeaways from this conversation is that we have to understand grief in the right context. We have to have a coping mechanism, right? And we also have to look for closures. On music, I want to mention about this particular artist. His name is Douglas McGregor. Okay, so he lost his mom when he was 7 years old, and he never really grieved. He was very close to his mom. His entire childhood was lost, because 7, it's early on. All that beautiful things that he would have created in terms of memories of his mom growing up. So it was disrupted. 25 years later, when he was 32, it hit him, and he went into depression. So that's delayed grief, right? It's like,
right.
And so what he did, and he was a musician, and he was filling up all this entire 25 years of his life playing music. He's a guitarist actually, and composing stuff, performing, etc. So he dealt with it in the only way he knew, which is through music. So he composed this entire thing songs for loss and healing, which is just guitar renditions, no vocals in that, as a tribute to his mom and as a way of him dealing with his loss and grief, right? So I think it's very, again, poetic and beautiful. I did listen to it, like I would recommend that you listen to it as well. Also you would deal with it in the only ways that you know, and it's very personal, right? So if you're an author, you might write about it. If you're a singer, you might sing about it. If you're a musician, you might compose music about it. And if you are in the corporate sector, you might work your ass off to keep away from it. So though that's not the ideal way, but there has to be a process. That's a key message of that. That there has to be closure.
Processing these things is very important. Because what happens is, like, if those things are not processed, they come out in the ways that you do not want it to come out, and you often do not realize it.
Agreed.
So, like, during the grieving process, it's very important that you move through this journey to a phase of acceptance.
Agreed.
That this has happened, right? Acceptance does not mean you never think about them again, but you have come to terms with whatever has happened. So
agree.
And like what you said, people might have individual their ways of coping up with it, but to cope up with it in a good and healthy way, that's what's really important.
I get it. So on that note, we hope this discussion and this episode was helpful to you in understanding grief, in sort of relating to your own loss and grief, and also a little bit of view on coping mechanisms and techniques of how you can find closure and move on. So until we see you next time, thank you.